I thought helping my best friend move out of his apartment was going to be a quick favor. A couple boxes, maybe some pizza afterward, then I'd head home and forget about the whole thing. Instead, we ended up trapped inside his old apartment together all night. And somewhere between the flickering hallway lights, the broken lock, and the storm outside, everything between me and Ken changed. I still replay that night sometimes. Especially the moment I realized he was looking at me differently. It started on a Friday evening. Ken had called me sounding stressed out of his mind. "Please tell me you're free tonight," he said the second I answered. "That depends. Are you asking me to help you hide a body?" He laughed under his breath. "Worse. I need help moving." I groaned dramatically while grabbing my keys anyway. "You're lucky you're hot." "Shut up," he muttered, but I could hear the grin in his voice. Ken had been my best friend since sophomore year of college. We were the kind of friends people constantly assumed were dating. Mostly because we spent too much time together and argued like an old married couple. He was tall, athletic without trying too hard, messy dark hair, stupidly nice smile. The kind of guy who could wear sweatpants and still make people stare at him in public. Unfortunately for me, I noticed that a little too much. Not that it mattered. Ken was straight. At least as far as I knew. Over the years, I'd gotten good at burying whatever dumb crush I had on him beneath sarcasm and friendship. It worked most of the time. Except when he looked at me too long. Or touched my shoulder casually. Or smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. Then things got complicated in my head again. By the time I got to his apartment building, rain was already pouring hard enough to flood the streets. Ken buzzed me in immediately. The second I stepped into his apartment, I found total chaos. Boxes everywhere. Half disassembled furniture. Clothes hanging off chairs. His kitchen looked like a tornado had passed through it. "You're a disaster," I said. Ken appeared from the hallway carrying a box against his chest. His gray t-shirt clung slightly to him from sweat, and I immediately hated myself for noticing. "Nice to see you too, Ashton. You said helping you move," I replied. "This looks like an evacuation." He laughed and set the box down. "My new place let me move in early tomorrow morning. I just need everything packed tonight." "You waited until the last possible second?" "I work best under pressure." "You work only under pressure." He walked past me toward the kitchen, brushing my shoulder as he passed. Such a small thing. Barely contact. Still, my stomach tightened instantly. I ignored it. "Did you at least order food?" I asked. Ken pointed toward the counter. "Pizza's coming." "Okay, then I forgive you." For the next couple hours, we packed boxes while music played softly from his speaker. Honestly, it felt weirdly domestic. At one point I was kneeling beside a box of books taping it shut when Ken dropped down beside me. "You don't have to help this much, you know." "You say that now," I replied. "But if I leave, you'll probably shove forks into a trash bag and call it organized." "That's efficient." "That's psychotic." He laughed again. God, I liked making him laugh. I looked up at him for maybe a second too long. His expression softened a little when our eyes met. There was this pause. One of those strange quiet moments that sneaks up on you. Then his phone buzzed, breaking it instantly. Ken sighed after checking the screen. "Elevator's broken." "What?" "Maintenance texted the building group chat. Apparently it's stuck between floors because of the storm." I stared at him. "You live on the 9th floor?" "Yeah." "You're telling me we have to carry all this down 9 flights of stairs tomorrow?" He rubbed his face tiredly. "Please don't make me think about that right now." The storm got worse as the night went on. By 10, thunder was rattling the windows hard enough to make the apartment shake slightly. The power flickered twice. "Good horror movie setup," I muttered while sealing another box. Ken smirked from across the room. "If we died tonight, I'm haunting you specifically. You'd miss me too much." Unfortunately true. That word hit me harder than it should have. We finished most of the packing around midnight. Both of us looked exhausted. Ken dropped backward onto the couch dramatically. I'm dead. You barely lifted anything. Emotional support is exhausting. I snorted and sat beside him. For a minute neither of us talked. Rain hammered against the windows. The apartment felt strangely quiet despite the storm. Then the lights went out completely. The room dropped into darkness. Oh, come on! Ken groaned. A second later, emergency hallway lights flickered dimly through the windows. You pay rent for this place? I asked. Apparently for the full haunted experience. Ken stood up and checked his phone flashlight. No power in the whole building, he said. Great. Guess I'm sleeping here. His eyes lifted toward me. For some reason, the air between us suddenly felt heavier. You can if you want, he said quietly. I shrugged casually even though my chest tightened. Not like I'm driving home in that. Another loud crack of thunder shook the room. Ken walked toward the apartment door. I should make sure the hallway's okay. The second he opened it, we both heard voices yelling somewhere downstairs. Then a loud metallic slam echoed through the building. Ken frowned. What was that? A few minutes later, after checking his phone again, he looked back at me with an expression I didn't like. The emergency system locked the stairwell doors during the outage. I blinked. What? And maintenance can't reset them remotely. You're kidding. I wish. So we're trapped? Ken gave a tired laugh. Looks like it. And for some reason, standing there in the dim emergency lighting with rain pounding outside and my best friend looking at me like that, I had a feeling this night was about to become a whole lot more complicated. Being trapped in an apartment building with your best friend sounds a lot less dramatic when you first hear it. In reality? By 1 a.m, the place already felt strange. Too quiet. Too dark. And way too small. Ken lit a couple candles he found shoved in a kitchen drawer while I sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by half-packed boxes. I can't believe this is happening, I muttered. At least you're stuck with someone handsome. I looked up at him. Confidence during a crisis is impressive. It's all I have left. He grinned while setting another candle on the coffee table. The warm light changed the whole apartment. Softer shadows. Golden light across his face. It made everything feel weirdly intimate. I tried not to think about that. Tried and failed. You hungry? Ken asked. We already ate an entire pizza. I cope with stress through food. You cope with everything through food. Correct. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back holding 2 beers. Emergency supplies, he announced. I accepted one gratefully. The storm outside kept getting worse. Rain slammed against the windows while thunder rolled through the building every few minutes. Honestly, it should have been miserable. Instead, sitting there with Ken felt nice. Dangerously nice. We ended up talking for hours. Not surface-level stuff either. Real conversations. The kind you only have late at night when the world feels disconnected from everything else. At some point Ken stretched out across the couch while I leaned against the opposite armrest with my feet near his legs. You ever think about moving somewhere else? He asked suddenly. Like another city? Yeah. I shrugged. Sometimes. Where would you go? I thought about it for a second. Somewhere quieter maybe. Less expensive. Somewhere I don't have to hear my neighbors fighting through the walls every night. Ken laughed softly. Then he looked at me for a moment too long. I think I'd miss you too much. The words hit me right in the chest. I tried to play it off casually. You'd survive. Debatable. His voice was quieter now. The candlelight flickered between us. God. Moments like this were exactly why being friends with him was torture sometimes. Because Ken had this way of saying things that sounded joking on the surface while still feeling strangely honest underneath. I took a sip of beer mostly to avoid responding. You ever dated anyone serious? He asked after a minute. That caught me off guard. Where did that come from? I'm curious. You've known me for 6 years. Yeah, but you never really talk about that stuff. I hesitated. He wasn't wrong. I usually avoided relationship conversations around him for obvious reasons. Not really, I admitted. Nothing that lasted. Ken nodded slowly. What about you? He leaned his head back against the couch. Thought I was close once. The blonde girl from last year? Claire? Yeah. He made a face. That ended horribly. You dated for like 8 months. Exactly. Long enough to realize we wanted completely different things. Something about his tone felt heavier than usual. I glanced at him carefully. You okay? Yeah. But he didn't sound convincing. The room felt quiet again except for the storm outside. Then Ken suddenly looked over at me. Can I ask you something weird? That sentence never leads anywhere good. He smiled faintly but didn't look away. Have you ever been in love with someone you couldn't have? My stomach dropped instantly. The question felt way too specific. I forced a laugh. That's dark. Still. I looked down at the beer bottle in my hands. Yeah, I admitted quietly. Ken stayed silent. I could feel him watching me. What happened? He asked. I shrugged carefully. Nothing happened. Did they know? No. Why not? Because it was you. Instead, I said. Didn't seem worth ruining things. Ken's expression changed slightly. Softer somehow. More serious. Then another crack of thunder shook the apartment hard enough to rattle the windows. The lights in the hallway flickered outside. And before I could think too much about the conversation, Ken stood up. I'm checking the hallway again. You think the power's back? No idea. I followed him toward the apartment door anyway. The hallway outside looked eerie under the dim red emergency lights. Empty and silent except for distant rain battering the building. Ken stepped toward the stairwell door and tried the handle again. Locked. Still trapped, he muttered. I leaned against the wall beside him. Guess we live here now. He snorted softly. Then another loud boom echoed somewhere below us. Not thunder this time. Something mechanical. The entire floor vibrated slightly under our feet. Ken frowned immediately. What the hell was that? A second later, the emergency lights blinked off. Complete darkness swallowed the hallway. Ken? I'm here. His voice sounded much closer now. Then I felt his hand grab my wrist instinctively in the dark. Everything in my body reacted instantly. Warm fingers wrapping around me. Firm. Protective. The emergency lights flickered back on after a few seconds. But neither of us moved right away. Ken was still holding my wrist. And now he was looking directly at me. Really looking at me. My pulse hammered stupidly hard. Slowly, his eyes dropped to my mouth for half a second. Then back up again. The tension between us hit so hard it almost felt physical. I don't know how long we stood there like that. Probably only a few seconds. Felt much longer. Then voices echoed faintly from another floor, breaking the moment instantly. Ken let go of my wrist like he just realized what he was doing. Sorry, he muttered quickly. It's fine. But neither of us sounded normal anymore. We went back inside the apartment without speaking much. And somehow, after that moment in the hallway, everything felt different. Like we'd crossed into something we couldn't uncross. After the hallway thing, neither of us knew how to act normal anymore. At least I didn't. Every glance suddenly felt loaded. Every touch lasted too long. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if Ken felt it too. We settled back into the living room, awkwardly quiet now. The storm outside hadn't eased up at all. Rain streaked down the windows while distant thunder rolled through the building every few minutes. Ken sat on one end of the couch. I stayed on the floor beside the coffee table pretending to reorganize packing tape because apparently I'd lost the ability to function like a normal person. You're doing that thing, Ken said eventually. What thing? Overthinking. I glanced up at him. He was watching me carefully now, elbows resting on his knees. I'm not overthinking. Ashton. The way he said my name made my chest tighten. I looked away first. Okay, maybe a little. Ken exhaled quietly and leaned back against the couch. That hallway moment got weird. Straight to the point. Cool. Great. Fantastic. I forced a casual shrug even though my pulse immediately sped up. It's fine. You sure? Yeah. But my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Ken studied me for another second before looking down at his hands. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. That hit harder than it should have. Because uncomfortable wasn't even remotely the problem. You didn't, I said quickly. His eyes lifted again. For a second neither of us spoke. Then Ken asked quietly, "Then why do you look nervous?" I laughed once under my breath. You really want the honest answer? Yeah. Dangerous question. I should have dodged it. Instead, I stared at the flickering candlelight and admitted, "Because sometimes you act like you're about to kiss me." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the storm outside suddenly felt distant. Ken didn't laugh. Didn't make a joke. He just stared at me. And that terrified me more than any reaction could have. My stomach twisted immediately. Forget I said that. No. His voice came out low. Serious. I looked up slowly. Ken's expression had changed completely now. Softer. More open somehow. Why would you think that? He asked quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. Ken. What? You can't seriously be asking me that. He held my gaze. Then he leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on his knees. Ashton. I need you to say it. My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. The room suddenly felt too warm. You flirt with me constantly, I said finally. Ken's eyes didn't leave mine. You touch me all the time. His jaw tightened slightly. You look at me like. I stopped myself. Like what? God. I should not have been having this conversation with him. But the way he was looking at me right now made it impossible to think clearly. Like you want something, I admitted quietly. Ken inhaled slowly. Then looked away for the first time all night. The silence stretched painfully. Finally he muttered, Maybe I do. Everything in me stopped. What? He rubbed a hand over his face and laughed softly like he couldn't believe himself either. This is probably a terrible time to figure this out. I stared at him. Figure what out? Ken looked back at me. And there it was again. That look. The one that always messed with my head. Except this time it felt undeniable. I don't know what's been wrong with me lately, he admitted quietly. Every time you're around, I keep thinking about you differently. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. Differently how? His eyes flicked down to my mouth again. Then back up. That's the problem. Holy shit. I couldn't breathe properly. For years I'd imagined hearing something like this from him. Dreamed about it sometimes when I was stupid enough to let myself. Now it was actually happening and my brain completely short-circuited. Ken stood up suddenly and started pacing once through the apartment. This is messed up, he muttered. How? Because you're my best friend. Yeah. And I don't even know what this means yet. I slowly stood too. The apartment suddenly felt very small between us. You don't have to figure it out tonight, I said carefully. Ken looked at me for a long second. Then he laughed softly under his breath. That's hard to do when you're standing there looking like that. The tension hit instantly again. Sharp. Heavy. I swallowed hard. Looking like what? He stepped closer before stopping himself halfway. Don't do that. Do what? Make me say things I'm already trying not to say. My pulse was completely out of control now. The storm crashed outside again, lightning briefly illuminating the apartment in white light. And somehow that moment broke whatever restraint we still had left. Because before I could think better of it, I asked quietly, Do you want to kiss me? Ken froze. His eyes locked onto mine instantly. Every sound in the apartment disappeared. Then very slowly, he nodded once. The honesty of it nearly wrecked me. I think my body moved before my brain did after that. One second we were standing a few feet apart. The next I was right in front of him, close enough to feel his breath. Ken looked stunned for half a second. Then his hand slid carefully against my waist like he was testing whether this was real too. I should have stopped it. Probably both of us should have. Instead, I looked up at him and whispered, "Then kiss me." And the second those words left my mouth, Ken kissed me like he'd been holding himself back for way too long. The kiss hit me like a shock to the chest. Warm. Immediate. Real. For a second I just stood there frozen because my brain genuinely couldn't process the fact that this was actually happening. Ken's hand tightened slightly at my waist as he kissed me again, slower this time, like he was still figuring it out too. And honestly, that somehow made it worse. Because this wasn't reckless or joking or drunken stupidity. He meant it. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing harder than we should have been. Ken stared at me with this completely stunned expression. "Okay," he said softly. "So I definitely wanted to do that." I laughed nervously, heart hammering against my ribs. "Yeah. Same." Neither of us moved away though. That was the dangerous part. We were still standing close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. Ken's thumb brushed absent-mindedly against my side, and my entire body reacted instantly. His eyes flicked downward like he noticed. The tension between us came roaring back even harder. "I have no idea what we're doing," he admitted quietly. "You think I do?" A faint smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Then it faded again just as quickly. "Ashton." The way he said my name this time sounded almost overwhelmed. Like he'd been holding something in for a while and didn't know what to do with it anymore. I swallowed hard. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said immediately. Then after a pause, "No. Not really." I stayed quiet. Ken leaned back against the kitchen counter behind him, dragging a hand through his messy hair. "I think I've been trying not to think about this for months." That caught me off guard. "Months?" He laughed once under his breath. "You seriously didn't notice?" "Notice what?" "That I've been losing my mind around you." My stomach flipped violently. Ken looked down for a second before continuing. "At first I thought I was just stressed or confused or whatever. Then every time you touched me, I started noticing it." His eyes lifted back to mine. "And that made things worse." I couldn't even think straight anymore. The idea that he'd been feeling this too, maybe for a while, completely scrambled my brain. "You're serious?" I asked quietly. Ken looked almost offended. "I just kissed you, Ashton." "Yeah, but..." "But what? You've always been straight." His expression shifted at that. Not defensive exactly. Just thoughtful. "I don't know what I am right now," he admitted. "I just know that when you walked into this apartment tonight, I couldn't stop looking at you." Jesus Christ. I looked away before my face completely gave me away. Ken noticed immediately. "Hey!" I glanced back up. He stepped closer again, slower this time. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I think you've had me figured out before I figured myself out." I laughed softly under my breath. "Trust me. I was very committed to pretending none of this existed. That makes two of us." Another silence settled between us. But now it felt different. Charged. Heavy in a way that made my skin feel too tight. Outside, lightning flashed through the windows again. Thunder cracked loud enough to shake the apartment. Instinctively, I flinched slightly. Ken smirked immediately. "You jumped?" "I hate thunderstorms." "You absolutely do not." "I hate loud thunder specifically." He laughed quietly. Then, without thinking, he reached up and brushed his fingers lightly against my neck. The touch was so gentle it almost destroyed me. Every nerve in my body lit up instantly. Ken noticed my reaction immediately, too. His expression darkened slightly. Not aggressive. Just wanting. And somehow that look from him felt more dangerous than anything else tonight. "You react to everything," he said softly. I swallowed hard. "That's your fault." His thumb brushed my neck again. Slow. Careful. I could barely breathe now. Tell me to stop, he murmured. The problem was I absolutely did not want him to stop. Not even a little. Instead, I whispered, I think if you kiss me again, I'm gonna make really bad decisions. Ken stared at me for half a second. Then he muttered, Yeah, I'm having that problem too. And then he kissed me again. This time there was nothing hesitant about it. His hands slid to my waist immediately, pulling me closer until I was pressed against him. My brain completely shut down after that. All I could focus on was him. The warmth of his body. The roughness of his hands. The way he kissed me like he was trying to figure out something he'd wanted for a long time. I grabbed the front of his shirt without even realizing it. Ken made this quiet sound against my mouth that nearly wrecked me on the spot. Then suddenly he pulled back fast, breathing uneven. We should slow down. I blinked at him, equally out of breath. Probably. Neither of us moved though. Ken laughed softly like he noticed that too. This is such a bad idea. Yeah. You agreeing that quickly is rude. I smiled despite myself. Then another loud crack of thunder hit outside and the lights in the hallway flickered violently again. A second later, the apartment door suddenly rattled hard. Both of us jumped apart instantly. What the hell? Someone cursed loudly from the hallway outside. Then a voice yelled through the door. Building maintenance! Anybody stuck in there? Ken and I stared at each other for half a second like we'd both forgotten other people existed. Then the apartment door rattled again. Anybody in there? The maintenance guy yelled. Ken cleared his throat immediately and stepped away from me so fast it almost made me laugh. Almost. Yeah, he called back, voice slightly strained. We're here. I bit the inside of my cheek trying not to smile while Ken shot me a warning look. The door opened a crack before stopping against the security latch. A tired-looking maintenance worker leaned into the gap holding a flashlight. Good news, he said. Power should be back soon. Bad news is the stairwell locks are still jammed. So we're still stuck? I asked. Until morning probably. Ken sighed dramatically beside me. Love that. The guy shrugged apologetically. Storm messed up the whole system. After another quick update, he moved on to the next apartment. The second the hallway went quiet again, silence dropped heavily back into the room. Ken rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, yeah, I replied. Neither of us knew where to go from there. 5 minutes ago we were making out in his kitchen like years of unresolved tension had exploded all at once. Now we were standing 3 feet apart pretending we could suddenly act normal again. Impossible. Ken grabbed his beer off the counter mostly to have something to do with his hands. I noticed his fingers were still slightly shaky. That definitely didn't help my own situation. So, he said carefully, we should probably talk. Probably. But neither of us started talking. Instead, we just looked at each other again. And there it was. That pull. The same one that kept dragging us back together tonight no matter how hard we tried to act reasonable. Ken exhaled slowly. You know what's messed up? What? I should feel weird right now. I leaned against the counter across from him. But you don't. No. His eyes stayed on mine. I really don't. Something warm spread through my chest hearing that. Ken stared down at the beer bottle in his hands before speaking again. I keep thinking about all those times I almost crossed the line with you. My pulse immediately sped up. What does that mean? He laughed softly under his breath. You seriously never noticed? Ken. There were moments. What moments? He looked up again. Last month when we watched movies at your place and you fell asleep against me? I remembered instantly. We'd been on my couch at like 2 a.m. I'd woken up half asleep with my head against his shoulder and his arm around me. At the time I'd convinced myself it didn't mean anything. Now? Apparently not. I stayed awake for like an hour after you passed out, Ken admitted quietly. My chest tightened. Why? Because I wanted to kiss you. Jesus Christ. I looked away immediately. Ken laughed softly. That reaction right there is exactly why I kept trying to ignore this. You can't just say things like that. Why not? Because I'm trying very hard not to completely lose my mind right now. His expression softened instantly. Then, quieter. You have no idea what hearing that does to me. The tension between us came rushing back again. I hated how easy it was. 1 second we'd be talking normally. The next it felt impossible to breathe properly around him. Ken stepped closer slowly this time, watching my face carefully like he was still making sure this was okay. When he stopped in front of me, his voice dropped lower. Can I ask you something? Depends. How long have you liked me? Straight to the chest. I laughed nervously. That's evil. I'm serious. I stared at him for a second before giving up. Honestly? Ken nodded. Probably since college. His eyes widened slightly. You're kidding. Nope. Why the hell didn't you ever say anything? I gave him an incredulous look. Because you were aggressively straight. He snorted. You dated like 20 girls. That's not true. It's close enough. Ken rubbed his face, laughing quietly. Wow. What? You really hid that well. Yeah, because unlike you, I enjoy emotional stability. Fair. The apartment fell quiet again. But now the silence felt warm instead of tense. Comfortable. Dangerously comfortable. Ken looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. I think part of me always knew. That caught me off guard. What? He shrugged slightly. Not consciously, maybe. But every time someone asked if we were together. He trailed off. What about it? I never hated the idea as much as I probably should have. My stomach flipped hard enough to physically hurt. Ken stepped even closer after that until there was barely space left between us. I could feel the warmth radiating off him again. And judging by the way his breathing changed, he felt this too. Tell me something honestly, he murmured. Okay. If this storm never happened tonight, his eyes locked onto mine. Would you ever have told me? I thought about it for maybe half a second. No. Ken smiled faintly. Yeah. Me either. Then he reached up slowly and brushed his knuckles against my jaw. Gentle. Careful. The kind of touch that somehow felt even more intimate than kissing him. My heart absolutely folded. You know what's really messing with me? He admitted softly. What? That this feels natural. God. I couldn't handle him saying things like that. Not after wanting this for years. Not when he was standing this close looking at me like I was something important. I swallowed hard. Ken. But whatever I was about to say disappeared completely because the lights suddenly came back on all at once. The apartment brightened instantly. Both of us blinked at the sudden change. Then Ken looked at me properly under the full light for the first time since we kissed. And the expression on his face completely destroyed whatever composure I had left. Because he looked at me like he wanted to do it again immediately. The lights being back on should have made things feel normal again. Instead, it made everything worse. Because now I could see him clearly. And Ken was looking at me in a way he never had before. Openly. No pretending anymore. The apartment suddenly felt too warm. Too bright. Too small for the amount of tension sitting between us. Ken leaned lightly against the counter, eyes still locked on mine. You're staring, I muttered. So are you. Yeah, but I'm trying to stop. That makes one of us. I laughed softly under my breath, mostly because if I didn't, I thought my heart might actually explode. For a second neither of us moved. Then Ken pushed himself off the counter and walked toward me slowly. Not rushed. Not hesitant either. Just deliberate. Every step made my pulse climb higher. When he stopped in front of me again, his voice dropped lower. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That I almost never asked you to come tonight. That hit harder than it should have. I looked up at him carefully. Seriously? I almost hired movers. I snorted. That would have been a waste of money. Yeah, he said quietly. Would have been the worst mistake of my life, apparently. God. I looked away immediately, smiling helplessly at the floor. Ken noticed. I like making you flustered. You're enjoying this way too much. You have no idea. The warmth in his voice made my chest ache. Then his hand slid gently against my waist again like it had earlier. Familiar already. That realization alone nearly wrecked me. My eyes lifted back to his instantly. Ken's expression softened the second he saw my reaction. Still okay? He asked quietly. The fact that he kept checking mattered more than he probably realized. Yeah, I admitted softly. Good. His thumb brushed lightly against my side once. My breathing immediately betrayed me. Ken smiled faintly. See? That. You're evil. You like it. Unfortunately true. The storm outside had finally started calming down, but the apartment still felt wrapped in its own little world. Like the rest of reality had paused outside the windows somewhere. Ken looked at me for another long second before speaking again. I'm trying really hard to be responsible right now. That's concerning. He laughed quietly. I mean it. Because if I stop thinking for like 5 seconds. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. Then back up. I felt heat rush straight into my face. Ken. What? I'm being honest. That's the problem. His smile widened slightly. Then softer. I don't think I've ever wanted someone this badly before. That completely knocked the air out of me. Not because of the words themselves. Because of how genuine he sounded saying them. I stared at him speechless for a second. Then finally managed. You really picked the worst possible time to realize all this. I know. You couldn't have figured this out before we got trapped together? Ken laughed under his breath. Honestly? I think being stuck here is the only reason I finally stopped lying to myself. The honesty in that nearly melted me on the spot. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. Ken groaned dramatically. You should answer it, I said. I don't want to. Adult responsibilities are important. You sound like my mother. Still, he pulled his phone out and glanced at the screen. His expression shifted instantly. What? It's Claire. The ex? Yeah. I straightened slightly. You should probably answer that. Ken hesitated before picking up. I tried not to listen while pretending to reorganize boxes again. Didn't work. Mostly because Ken kept glancing at me during the call. Finally, he sighed softly. No, Claire. I'm not coming over tonight. Pause. Then. Because I'm with someone. My stomach flipped immediately. Ken's eyes stayed on mine while he said it. Another pause. Then he rubbed his forehead tiredly. No, not like that. A beat passed. Then he laughed quietly under his breath. Honestly? I don't even know what this is yet. The call ended a minute later. The apartment fell quiet again. I looked at him carefully. Everything okay? Yeah. He shoved his phone back into his pocket. She wanted to know if we could try again. And? Ken walked closer again without hesitation this time. I said no. The air shifted instantly. Because of tonight? I asked quietly. He stopped directly in front of me. No, he said softly. Then after a pause. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I think my heart actually skipped. Ken reached up slowly and brushed his fingers through my hair near my temple. The gesture was so gentle it almost hurt. You know what's funny? He murmured. What? I spent years thinking you were completely out of my league. I stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. Ashton, have you seen yourself? I laughed helplessly, covering my face for half a second. This feels insane. I know. But good insane. That smile appeared again. The real one. The one that always made me weak long before any of this started. Then his hand slid gently down from my hair to my jaw, thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. and suddenly everything slowed again. The noise outside. The storm. The apartment. All of it faded behind the way he was looking at me now. Like he couldn't believe this was real either. "You know what I want right now?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "What?" "To stay exactly like this for a while." And honestly, for the first time all night, being trapped there didn't feel like a problem at all. I don't think either of us slept much that night. Not because anything dramatic happened. Honestly, the opposite. After everything exploded between us earlier, things became strangely soft. Calm. Ken and I ended up sitting together on the couch while the storm slowly faded outside. The apartment still looked wrecked from moving boxes, but now it felt weirdly cozy instead of stressful. At some point, my legs stretched across his lap without either of us acknowledging it. Then his hand settled absent-mindedly against my ankle. Then stayed there. Every tiny thing between us suddenly mattered now. Every glance. Every touch. Every pause. "You're smiling again," Ken murmured. I looked over from where I'd been pretending to watch the rain outside. "No, I'm not. You literally are. Maybe you're just funny looking." "That's definitely not it." I laughed quietly under my breath. God. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this happy and this terrified at the same time. Ken leaned his head back against the couch cushions, looking exhausted now that the adrenaline had finally worn off. "You know what's really weird?" he said. "What?" "I thought this would feel complicated." I looked at him carefully. "And it doesn't?" He thought for a second. "I mean, logically?" "Yeah. Probably. Very reassuring. But with you?" His eyes met mine again. "No. Not really." That hit me harder than any kiss tonight. Because I knew exactly what he meant. Everything about this should have felt messy or awkward or wrong somehow. Instead, it felt like something that had been sitting between us for years waiting to happen. Ken rubbed his thumb slowly against my ankle without realizing he was doing it. The small repetitive touch made it impossible to think straight. "You're doing that thing again," I muttered. "What thing?" "Touching me like you're trying to kill me slowly." He snorted softly. "Sorry." But he didn't move his hand away. Not even close. The apartment had gone mostly quiet by then. No thunder anymore. Just occasional rain tapping softly against the windows. For the first time all night, it felt peaceful. Then Ken suddenly looked over at me again. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" "Always. I used to get jealous when you went on dates." I blinked at him. "What?" He groaned immediately, covering his face briefly with one hand. "See? I knew that sounded insane." "No, hold on." I sat up straighter. "You were jealous?" "A little." "A little?" Ken looked at me through his fingers. "Okay, a lot." I stared at him in disbelief. "All this time?" "I didn't know why at first," he admitted. "I'd just hear you talking about some guy and suddenly be in a terrible mood for no reason. That is deeply inconvenient information to receive now." "I know." I laughed helplessly and leaned back again. Then quieter. "You have no idea how badly I wanted this at one point." Ken's expression softened instantly. "At one point?" I shrugged. "I kinda convinced myself it would never happen eventually." His hand finally moved from my ankle, sliding gently along my leg before settling at my knee. The touch felt intentional this time. "Careful. You should have told me," he said softly. "I was trying to keep my dignity intact. You've seen me cry during Marvel movies. That's different." "No, it's not." I smiled despite myself. Then Ken shifted slightly closer beside me. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just naturally. His shoulder pressed lightly against mine. And somehow that tiny bit of contact felt more intimate than anything else tonight. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he asked quietly. "What?" "That tomorrow morning we're just gonna wake up and still be us." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. I don't want this to turn into one of those situations people pretend never happened. My chest tightened immediately. Ken, I'm serious. His voice had gone softer now, more vulnerable than I was used to hearing from him. I know I'm figuring things out kind of late here, he admitted. But I don't want tonight to disappear once the storm's over. The honesty in his face nearly wrecked me completely. I shifted closer without thinking this time until our knees pressed together fully. It's not disappearing from me either, I said quietly. Ken looked relieved so quickly it almost hurt to see. Then he smiled. Small. Real. God, I was absolutely done for. A while later, sometime close to 4 in the morning, exhaustion finally started catching up to both of us. Ken stretched out across the couch dramatically. I think my spine's broken. You carried one lamp and complained the whole time. It was emotionally heavy. I rolled my eyes. Then Ken looked over at me with that softer expression again. You should sleep. So should you. He shifted slightly, lifting one arm along the back of the couch behind me. The invitation was obvious enough to make my heartbeat pick up again. You're looking at me like I'm dangerous, he murmured. You are dangerous. Fair. I hesitated maybe 2 seconds before finally moving closer. The second I settled against him, Ken's arm wrapped around me automatically like it already belonged there. And somehow that simple instinctive movement affected me more than anything else tonight. He held me carefully. Naturally. Like this was something he'd wanted for a while. The apartment stayed quiet around us while exhaustion finally settled in. I could feel Ken's heartbeat slow steadily beneath my cheek. Then after a long silence, he murmured softly against my hair. You know this is gonna completely ruin regular friendship behavior for us now, right? I laughed quietly, eyes half closed. Yeah, I admitted. And honestly, I didn't mind that at all. I woke up to sunlight hitting my face and Ken's arms still wrapped around my waist. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then everything from last night came rushing back at once. The storm. The blackout. The hallway. The kissing. Ken. My heart immediately started going stupid again. I stayed still for a moment, listening to the quiet apartment around us. The rain had finally stopped sometime during the night. Morning light spilled through the windows now, soft and golden across the half-packed boxes. Ken shifted slightly behind me with a sleepy groan. Please tell me coffee still exists, he mumbled against my shoulder. I laughed quietly. You're awake. Barely. His arm tightened around me for half a second before he seemed to fully realize the position we were in. Then he froze. Slowly, I turned my head enough to look at him. Ken blinked at me sleepily. Then smiled. And honestly? That stupid soft morning smile nearly killed me. Okay, he said quietly. Still very into this. Heat rushed straight into my face. You're impossible. You like impossible. Unfortunately, yes. I sat up slowly while Ken stretched dramatically across the couch like a cat. Everything hurts, he complained. You chose the couch. You were using my chest as a pillow. I made sacrifices. I threw a couch pillow at him. He caught it easily, laughing. God. The fact that we could still joke around normally after everything somehow made this feel even more real. Not awkward. Not forced. Just us. Only different now. Better different. Ken got up first and wandered toward the kitchen. A minute later I heard cabinets opening. You have exactly one coffee pod left, he announced. That sounds like a you problem. No, because now we have to share. Tragic. He glanced over at me with that look again. That softer one he'd been giving me all night. Then he smiled faintly. We're definitely flirting now, huh? I laughed helplessly. I think we crossed that line hours ago. Fair. A little later, while we drank terrible half-cups of coffee sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, reality finally started creeping back in. The power was restored. The elevators were working again. People moved through the hallways outside normally now. The night was over. which meant this wasn't just some isolated moment anymore. It was real life now. I think Ken felt the shift too because eventually he looked over at me more seriously. "So," he said quietly. "So, you okay?" The question felt bigger than it sounded. I thought about it honestly before answering. "Yeah," I admitted. "Kinda shocked. But yeah." Ken nodded slowly. "Same." He looked down at his coffee cup for a second before speaking again. "I meant what I said last night." I stayed quiet. "I don't want this to disappear once we leave this apartment." My chest tightened instantly. Ken looked up again, expression completely open now. "No pretending nothing happened," he continued softly. "No weird avoidance. None of that. You think I could pretend after you completely ruined my emotional stability?" That made him laugh quietly. Then his face softened again. "Ashton." The warmth in his voice made me look up immediately. "I really want to try this." There it was. Simple. Honest. Real. And somehow hearing those words from him after years of wanting this felt almost overwhelming. I smiled before I could stop myself. "Yeah? Yeah." I shook my head slowly in disbelief. "You know this is insane, right?" "A little. You spent years trying very hard to seem straight." Ken groaned immediately. "Please never phrase it like that again." I laughed. Then quieter. "You really want to do this?" He moved closer across the floor until our knees touched. "I haven't wanted anything more clearly in a long time." That answer settled something inside me instantly. All the nervousness. All the doubt. Gone. Because Ken looked completely certain now. About me. About this. About us. A knock suddenly interrupted the moment. "Maintenance," a voice called through the door. "Elevator's running again." Ken sighed dramatically. "Wow. Ruining my romantic character development." I snorted. Then he looked back at me with a grin. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "I still have to move all this stuff." "Oh, absolutely not," I said immediately. "You kissed me. That does not exempt you from manual labor." Ken laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. An hour later, we finally started carrying boxes downstairs. And honestly, it felt surreal. People passed us normally in the hallway while my entire life had quietly changed overnight. At one point, Ken reached for a heavy box at the same time I did. Our hands brushed. He glanced at me instantly, then smiled to himself. That tiny private smile made my chest ache in the best way. By the time we finished unloading the last box into his new apartment, both of us were exhausted. Ken collapsed dramatically onto the empty living room floor. "I'm never moving again." "You say that now." "I mean it spiritually." I laughed and dropped down beside him. For a minute we just laid there staring at the ceiling. Then Ken turned his head toward me. "You know," he said quietly, "getting trapped with you might actually be the best thing that's ever happened to me." My heart folded instantly. I smiled without looking away from him. "Yeah," I admitted softly. "Me too."